The AVSA Library Committee is pleased to present this educational video of a walkthrough of the Design Division of the 2016 AVSA National Show in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is Part 3, the Container Gardens, including dish gardens, terrariums, and natural gardens. Following the judging of the show, Paul Kroll and B.J. Ohme, both nationally recognized designers and judges, provided a recorded walkthrough and critique of the Design Division. Their diplomatic comments are intended to be an instructional and educational tool to teach design concepts and techniques to our viewers.
Welcome to the 2016 AVSA National Convention in Albuquerque. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Paul Kroll and Mr. B.J. Ohme, who are going to be going through the Design Division again with us and giving us some good, important critiques and comments on the design entries this year. So welcome, Paul, and welcome, B.J., and thank you very much for taking the time to do this with me.
You're welcome.
And so who's going to start us out and tell me what we're doing today?
Well, I'll start by saying that this is not intended to be a post-mortem on the judging, nor is it intended to disparage any of the designers. It's a critique on the designs themselves so that other people can learn from it to do more with their designs and how to execute them according to the schedule.
Great, thank you.
For viewers' convenience, the design walkthrough video is divided into 3 segments: interpretive plant arrangements, interpretive flower arrangements, and container gardens.
The last section of our design division is container gardens, and when you read your schedules, you'll notice that there are 3 sections in a design division: interpretive plant arrangements, interpretive flower arrangements, and container gardens. It does not say interpretive container gardens because there is no point score allotted for interpretation in container gardens. So that's why we recommend that they not be titled. And if you choose to title your arrangement, you can do so on your 3x5 card, which lists the plant material that you use in your container garden. The first section here is dish gardens, and it's a landscape design in a dish less than 12 inches in its longest dimension. In container gardens, the 40 points that we used in the interpretive plant and interpretive flower arrangement is replaced by the term landscape design. And a good friend of mine, president of my local chapter, says, "Is there nothing flat in nature?" Well, yes, there is, but is flat as interesting as hills and valleys, pathways, and so forth? And our handbook states that this is what we want to depict. So a container garden that's entirely flat has a lot less design appeal, landscape appeal, than one that's got heights and valleys. Whenever in any design, as it gets smaller in size, scale and proportion becomes increasingly more important. And almost all of the container gardens here in this show have African violets in them that are way too big for the size of the container. Our handbook says that the container gardens need to have at least one blooming African violet planted with other material. It does not say that the African violet needs to be the focal point, or at the center, or completely in your face visible. It can be hidden, it can be very small, but it has to be there.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think as we go down this section, we'll see where a lot of designers have put the African violet right in your face instead of incorporating it into the landscape plan. And maybe that would make some of the designs a little bit better.
This third container garden in has probably the best landscape design. There is some height at the back, and it goes down, and it even goes down inside the dish, so that there are different levels of height there, which is quite important. The tree section here might be a little bit heavy, but otherwise quite nice.
Paul, can you describe how they've used the piece of wood as an accessory?
Yes, they've used this piece of wood as an accessory. In a container garden, it's the plant material that is necessary to give you the height. You can't use wood or stone to get the height in your container garden, but you can use it as an accessory, as a dead log or something of that nature.
As it would appear in nature.
As it would appear in nature, yes. Unfortunately, this container garden received a red ribbon in the judging today. The container is extremely heavy, and there's really no landscape design there. It's absolutely flat, and quite, the nice plant material, healthy. Maybe this is a good time to say something about the plant material hanging over the edge of the dish. That's perfectly allowable and makes it look much more natural. We don't have to. Everything doesn't have to be within the confines of the dish.
And the judge's comments were container too heavy and not enough height or landscape plan. So just what Paul said.
The next class is also a dish garden class, and it's a landscape design in a dish greater than 12 inches and less than 24 in its longest length. We have some very nice muted color containers here that do not detract from the overall presentation, but again, most of them are quite flat in landscape design, and the tree material here is very heavy, and nice mosses, a little water feature there. But
Paul, can you expound maybe on what your height should be in relationship to the length of your container?
We don't have a formula as they do in some of the garden club shows, but it would have been nice to see this a little bit taller and maybe graduated down instead of having everything tall and then everything low.
More of a layer effect, more layering.
Right, layering. This is a very nicely shaped dish. Beautiful moss. Again, the tree material is pretty heavy. Some nice textures here with the variegated Aurelia. And this tiny little violet is about the right size for the whole dish garden. This one is much too large. Here's another that's quite flat in landscape design. The violet is enormous, and nice plant material, healthy and all, but out of perspective as far as the size of the violet is concerned. If this, and needing more height again for the size of the dish, if this were a chunk of nature outdoors, that African violet would be as big as somebody's house. Here again, a nicely beautiful piece of wood and nicely used with some planting in the hole itself. It's in the wood, but again, a huge mass there that makes it seem a bit heavy.
Yeah, almost too heavy, too thick.
Yeah, too thick.
I think this designer has done a better job of incorporating the African violet into the landscape, though, as opposed to the one before it, where it's just knocks you out.
Right. Another very well done garden with a piece of wood here that creates a cave and a little bit of a water feature here. But again, the violet is way too large in relationship to the overall planting.
And if you're trying to figure out what we mean by maybe too thick or everything up one height, this one I think has done a better job of starting with their height, but then their transition material isn't up here. It's gradually coming down instead of all...
A nice variation in height there.
Right.
This next container garden has some interesting material. Perhaps the Norfolk Island pine is a bit too heavy. I don't mind personally the umbrella effect, but it, with the several trunks that are there, it makes it a little bit heavy. And again, the violet is very large. Here we have a nice interpretation of the container, filling the container, and there is some height at the back here, and a slate wall, and a depth down to a water feature at the bottom, which adds, some varying heights in the landscape plan. The violet really pops because it's very large and very brightly colored.
Try and imagine this if this had a tiny violet like we had saw in the design 2 or 3 back, maybe incorporated up here in the greenery or maybe up here to where it blended in more with the landscape instead of just being out by itself. And that's also one of the things that if you don't grow a lot of African violets or you have to rely on somebody else to provide you, I know the designers a lot of times are just simply using what they can acquire. So
this dish garden, the dish color is a little bit bright with the peach, and then there's a white and a blue rim that kind of detracts from the whole thing. But a nice attempt at height and depth.
I think when I look at this one, I don't know if you agree, Paul, but maybe the moss covering almost, to me, it doesn't look finished like it's maybe, I maybe would have liked to have seen it all the way throughout.
Yes, that's true. On the other hand, in nature, not every bit of ground in the woods is covered with moss or ground cover, so it is possible to leave some soil there. At least there's no perlite and vermiculite.
Right.
The Schefflera, again, is a little bit heavy for the tree. This one is a real bone of contention for us because it's nicely planted, some beautiful, very healthy material. The violet is large, but not in your face conspicuous. This is a bit too heavy, and
Can you point to what's too heavy again, please?
This.
Thank you.
And this is disallowed. In container gardens, you can have no cut material. So these sticks coming up, while the exhibitor felt it enhanced the overall presentation, it should not have been judged. It should have been eliminated from consideration because of these cut sticks. It's disallowed in container gardens.
So we're going a long way from should have been eliminated to a blue ribbon, though.
Yes.
Always remember, when you go to a judge show, what one panel does is just that panel's opinion. And you could have 3 or 4 or 10 different panels come in and come up with something entirely different.
The exhibitor has chosen to have a little garden feature here at the front, which I don't think is really necessary, but again, that's only my opinion. They really wanted it there, so. Next class is Terrarium, the first of 2 terrarium classes, a landscape design in a covered terrarium limited to 12 inches in any dimension. And we have a very traditional type of terrarium on the right, not traditional one on the left. Beautiful container, but it's absolutely flat, and there's really no contrasting material inside. I'm going to take the liberty of lifting the cover off, which we can do for judging, and healthy plant material inside, but no real landscape design. There is a tiny little violet in there. But the container itself would be a very difficult one to plant. First of all, because of the curved sides, and most of all, because of its flat shape. This is a typical terrarium setting, planting. And what I like about this, I shouldn't say like, forgive me, Bill Foster, what is particularly attractive here is that the soil level has come way down to the bottom. There's no big chunk of soil showing at the face of the terrarium, and that has allowed a height at the back, dropping down to the bottom at the front, healthy plant material.
And an appropriately sized African violet.
Yeah, appropriately sized African violet, yes. The next class is terrarium, a landscape design in a covered terrarium limited to 24 inches in any dimension, so it's over 12, but limited to 24. We have a beautiful container here, but what do you see when you look at this? Do you see the terrarium planting, the landscape, or do you see the container? And again, that's the exhibitor's prerogative and the exhibitor's choice, but this type of terrarium, you're really taking a chance on giving the judges a bad time. What did the comment say?
The main comment was that the container distract. And it is a beautiful idea, and it does have an appropriately sized, much smaller African violet for the scale of the container, but
terrariums are always very difficult to photograph because of the shine on the glass and so forth. Curved terrariums are very difficult to plant because lots of times the material inside looks like it's trying to escape as it pushes against the walls of glass. Nice fallen log here, mosses. It could have had a little bit more contrast in textures, maybe something variegated, something a little bit different green color. And again, the violet is pretty large for that planting. This planting has more landscaping with height and lower sections, a water feature in the middle, some kind of a shelf there. But again, it would have been nice to see the planting of the tree material at the back be up a little bit so that it would have filled the container better. It's just like filling a niche. You're supposed to pretty much fill it.
And what Paul had stated about the last container garden is this designer has used different colors. There's a variegated leaf, here's a lighter green leaf. Your African violet has variegation, which breaks up the all green
total green
look.
Feature, that's right. Another nicely planted round terrarium. There's no actual tree material here, but because of the height of the soil level at the back, the fern at the top is high enough, and it allows a nice flow with a dry creek bed kind of thing, nice material around. The violet is not terribly conspicuous, but it is very large. This is a very nice brandy snifter type of container. I think the comment said something about grooming.
Grooming would improve the design, possibly so, but I think just what we've talked about on some of these other ones, as it's just bringing the height up to the rear. It's not filling the container as much as maybe it could be.
And this is a straight-sided terrarium. It's a very nice terrarium, but when you look at this, you see a lot of perlite or gravel, whatever this is at the bottom, a large area of depth here that is totally distracting from the overall presentation. And if that had been worked, it would have allowed a better landscape plan and bring the soil level right down, the planting level, right down to the bottom would have enhanced it quite a bit.
One thing I would like to comment on the last two is both of the exhibitors have decided to use 2 blooming plants instead of just 1. And I would say in both cases it wasn't necessary. Maybe 1 would have been
That's right.
sufficient.
And they're still too large for the size of the plant. The last class in container gardens is our natural garden classes. And natural garden is a landscape design in a natural container, usually meaning driftwood, rock, stone. One of the nicest natural gardens I ever saw planted was on a natural sponge, but most of us don't have access to that type of thing. Natural gardens are not allowed to have a base, so they have to be planted in whatever you choose as your natural container, and with no base. This container, I think, would have been enhanced if it had been positioned at a bit of an angle instead of being straight on. It's very long and straight, and it being straight on, it's kind of abrupt in presentation.
Paul, I actually have a question that I don't know about. Could an exhibitor take 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of wood and somehow nail them together to make a container garden, or does it have to just be one?
It's supposed
piece?
to be one piece, but it can be done if it's done very well, and so that it doesn't look like 2 pieces or more. A number of years ago at one of our national conventions, we had a natural garden that was constructed of a piece of driftwood and actually a ceramic looking piece of wood, or something that looked like wood, but it was ceramic, and they were put together. If you look closely, you could see that it was 2 different containers. So this exhibitor has chosen to have a little water feature at the side, and the violet is not conspicuous, but not really fresh either, and quite large. A natural garden, by the way, is the only one of our container gardens that is allowed to have more than 1 planting area. So you choose your container and decide where you're going to position your plants in order to make them to the best advantage. And here again, we've got a lot of tree material here. They've chosen to add a moth or a butterfly at the back. I'm not sure that's necessary. Accessorizing things is your choice, of course, but you want to make it as inconspicuous as possible.
One of the comments that the judges had on this was that there were too many accessories with the bird here and the turtle here.
Pretty much. This is a lovely stump of wood, and it's well planted, and everything seems right. The violet could have been a little bit smaller, but it's nicely incorporated the way the whole thing flows down. And by that I don't mean to deceive you thinking in terms of line, because we don't think of elements and principles of design in container gardens as much as we do in the other interpretive areas, but we do need to think about size and proportion, obviously. Here's another lovely piece of wood, gnarled and very nicely planted in a lot of ways, some interesting material. It appears to me that the violet is going to fall out. It's right in your face, and again, very large. If it had been placed back more under the tree or something, I think it would have presented better.
I think this one that we looked at prior, I don't know if we mentioned it, but they did a really good job of incorporating the African violet into the landscape.
Here's another really nice piece of wood, and some quite different textured materials being used. The violet again is very large, and I can't help but think when I see some of these that the exhibitor is thinking that the violet needs to be the focal point or front and center or whatever. That is not so. I must stress that again. And that's why the violet looks so big here and prominent. This is a a nicely planted small piece of wood. The fern and selaginella, no, I guess it's baby tears, is nicely done. It could have used a bit more height, and the violet is excessively large for that size planting. Here we have another compact piece of wood. It's not badly planted, but it really needs height here on top instead of the material that was used, and the violet is not doing well. It's not a healthy plant. It seems stressed. The comment on the card was that the plant is not looking good. And the last natural garden is another lovely piece of driftwood that's been planted with its various pockets. Some contrasting foliage, a little variegation, some very light green, a little too much of the aurelia at the top, I think. And the violet looks like it's going to fall out on its face, unfortunately, and it's very, very large.
Very large.
For the size of the planting itself. I always like to say when I do programs on design, I said it last year at the end of the tape that Bill and I did, growing is great, but designers have the most fun. And it's a wonderful thing to do. You should try it and enjoy it, but always read your schedule and heed the necessary rules and regulations. Read your handbook so you know what's allowed, what is not, such as that dish garden with the cut material in it. And try things. Look around. Look at what's been done and how designers do things so that you can learn.
That's exactly right. And as long as you're satisfied with it, maybe it didn't even get a blue ribbon, but if you're pleased with it and you've enjoyed the experience, then you've accomplished something. And like Paul said, jump in and try it. Because not all accomplished designers were good right out of the chute. It takes time to learn scale and proportion and proper use of color and all those good things. So.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. As usual, this has been incredibly informative. I think that this is going to be a great addition for the AVSA members or anyone who's looking to improve their design work and just have a little fun and give it a try. And I'll add one more comment, which is if you're going to try a design for a show, make sure you look at the show schedule ahead of time. And if there is a deadline on an entry for reserving a spot for your design, please make sure you've checked that first before you put all your work into a design to find out there's no room for it.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, and thank you so much.